I never thought a snowstorm in Boulder, Colorado would turn me into a criminal, but apparently the Pine Ridge Estates Homeowner Association had other plans for me that frigid February morning. My name is Yates Coleman, and I had been living in this cookie-cutter development for exactly 3 winters when everything went sideways. I worked as a mechanical engineer for a manufacturing company downtown, which meant I needed to leave my house by 7 in the morning to beat traffic. That particular Tuesday, we had gotten hit with 14 inches of snow overnight, and the plows had pushed all that white mess right up against the curb in front of my driveway. I spent 45 minutes that morning clearing my driveway, and like any sane person who needed to get to work, I shoveled some of that snow back onto the street where the plows had left it. Not into the middle of the road, mind you, just pushed it back toward the curb so I could actually get my car out without getting stuck. I thought nothing of it. I made it to work, had a relatively normal day dealing with machinery specifications and client calls, and returned home around 6 that evening. What greeted me was a bright orange envelope tucked into my front door, the kind that screamed official business. Inside was a notice of violation and a $500 fine from the Pine Ridge Estates HOA for illegally disposing of snow onto public streets in violation of community standards and local ordinances. $500 for shoveling snow. I stood there in my entryway, still wearing my work boots, staring at this piece of paper like it was written in another language. The letter was signed by Patricia Henderson, the HOA president, and it cited Section 4.7 of the community bylaws, which apparently forbade homeowners from placing snow, leaves, grass clippings, or any other debris onto public streets. It threatened additional fines if I did not comply immediately, and warned that repeat violations could result in legal action. I pulled out my phone and called the HOA office number listed on the letterhead. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. Patricia Henderson's voice, high-pitched and nasal, informed me that office hours were Monday through Thursday, 9 to 3, and that all concerns should be submitted in writing. I hung up without leaving a message. The next morning, I made sure to be more careful. I shoveled my driveway again because we had gotten another 3 inches overnight, and this time I piled all the snow on my front lawn, creating a massive mountain of white that blocked my living room window. It took me over an hour, making me late for work, but I was not about to pay another $500 fine for doing basic home maintenance. Thursday morning brought another orange envelope. This time, the fine was for $750 for creating an unsightly snow pile that diminishes neighborhood aesthetics and property values. I was also ordered to redistribute the snow in a manner consistent with community standards within 48 hours or face additional penalties. I actually laughed out loud when I read it. Where exactly was I supposed to put the snow? It was not like I could make it disappear. I lived in Colorado in the winter. Snow was kind of a given. That evening, I decided to attend the monthly HOA meeting at the Clubhouse. I had never gone to one before, had never seen the point, but now I needed answers. The Clubhouse was a sprawling single-story building near the development's entrance, complete with a gym, pool, and meeting rooms that the HOA liked to brag about in their marketing materials. I walked in at 7, exactly when the meeting was scheduled to start, and found about 20 other residents already seated in the main conference room. Patricia Henderson stood at the front, a woman in her early 50s with blonde hair cut in a severe bob and wearing a pantsuit that looked like it cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. She was shuffling papers and speaking in hushed tones with 2 other board members, a thin man named Gregory who served as treasurer, and a younger woman named Susan, who was the secretary. I took a seat near the back and waited. The meeting started with the usual announcements, discussions about upcoming maintenance projects and financial reports that made my eyes glaze over. Finally, during the open forum section, I raised my hand. Patricia looked at me with the kind of smile that did not reach her eyes. "Yes, Mr. Coleman, is it?" "That's right," I said, standing up. "I received 2 fines this week totaling $1,250, one for shoveling snow onto the street and another for piling it on my own lawn. I am confused about where exactly I am supposed to put snow when I clear my driveway." Several other residents turned to look at me with sympathy in their eyes. Patricia's smile grew tighter. "Mr. Coleman, the bylaws are quite clear. Snow removal must be conducted in accordance with Section 4.7, which prohibits placing snow on public streets, and Section 3.2, which requires that all properties maintain aesthetic standards. Large snow piles are unsightly and reflect poorly on our community. So where do I put it?" I asked again, keeping my voice level. "You are welcome to place it in your backyard, or you may hire a professional snow removal service that will haul it away," she said, as if this was the most obvious solution in the world. "My backyard is fenced and I cannot get equipment back there. And hiring a service to haul away snow costs hundreds of dollars every time it snows," I pointed out. Patricia shrugged, a delicate gesture that made me want to throw my phone at her. "The rules apply to everyone equally, Mr. Coleman. We all must make sacrifices to maintain our property values." "This is ridiculous," I said, my frustration finally breaking through. "These are made-up problems. Snow melts. It is temporary." "The fines stand," Patricia said firmly. "If you wish to contest them, you may submit a written appeal to the board, which we will review at next month's meeting. Now, if there are no other concerns, we need to move on to discussing the spring landscaping contracts." I sat down, my jaw clenched so tight I thought my teeth might crack. A few other residents brought up minor issues, but I barely heard them. After the meeting ended, an older man approached me as I was heading for the door. "Don't bother appealing," he said quietly. "I am Robert. I live on Meadowbrook Lane. Last year I got fined for my mailbox being the wrong shade of black. Appealed it twice. They denied it both times and added late fees. Eventually I just paid it and repainted the mailbox. Patricia runs this place like a dictatorship." "Someone needs to vote her out," I said. Robert snorted. "Good luck. She has been president for 6 years. She controls who gets on the ballot for board positions. Anyone who opposes her mysteriously has their nomination paperwork rejected for technicalities." I drove home that night furious. I was not the kind of person who broke rules or caused trouble. I paid my bills on time, kept my lawn mowed, and generally tried to be a good neighbor. But this was beyond reasonable. This was someone on a power trip using bureaucracy as a weapon. Friday morning, I woke up to another snowfall, 6 inches this time. I stood at my window with my coffee, watching the white blanket cover everything, and a plan started forming in my mind. If Patricia wanted to fine me no matter what I did with the snow, then I might as well make it count. I got dressed in my warmest clothes, grabbed my shovel, and spent the next 2 hours clearing my driveway. But instead of putting the snow on my lawn or the street, I loaded it into my wheelbarrow, trip after trip, and wheeled it down to the clubhouse 4 blocks away. The building had 3 main entrances, the front double doors, a side entrance near the gym, and a back door by the pool. I started with the front doors. I piled that snow high and tight, packing it against the doors until it reached about 4 feet tall. Then I moved to the side entrance and did the same thing. The back door got the same treatment. By the time I was done, All three entrances were blocked by solid walls of snow. I had also cleared my driveway completely and had even done my sidewalk for good measure. I stood back, admiring my work in the mid-morning sun, and then walked home. My arms ached and I was sweating despite the cold, but I felt better than I had in days. The call came 2 hours later. I did not recognize the number but answered anyway. "Mr. Coleman, this is Patricia Henderson. I am at the clubhouse right now, and I cannot get inside because someone has piled snow against all the doors. Do you know anything about this?" I leaned back on my couch, putting my feet up. "That's terrible. Did you check the security cameras?" "Our cameras have been malfunctioning this week," she said, her voice tight. "But multiple residents reported seeing you wheeling snow down the street this morning." "I was clearing my driveway," I said innocently. "You know, trying to follow the rules. I put all that snow somewhere it would not violate any bylaws. The clubhouse property is common area, right? Technically owned by all of us. I figured that was a safe place for it." The silence on the other end was deafening. When Patricia finally spoke, her voice was shaking with rage. "You will remove that snow immediately, or I will have you arrested for vandalism and trespassing." "I would be happy to remove it," I said cheerfully. "For a fee. See, you taught me that snow removal is expensive work. I am thinking $1,250 sounds fair." "That is what you find me, after all." She hung up on me. 10 minutes later, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find a Boulder police officer standing on my porch, looking tired and not particularly thrilled to be there. He was young, maybe late 20s, with the name Tag Morrison on his uniform. "Are you Yates Coleman?" he asked. "I am. I got a call about a dispute over snow removal. Can you tell me what is going on?" I invited him in and explained the whole situation, showing him the fines I had received and the ridiculous bylaws Patricia was enforcing. Officer Morrison listened patiently, occasionally nodding. "So you put the snow against the clubhouse doors?" he asked when I finished. "I put it on common area property that I partially own as a member of this HOA," I clarified. "I did not damage anything. It is just snow. It will melt." Officer Morrison rubbed his face. "Look, between you and me, this is a civil matter. It is an HOA dispute. I cannot arrest you for this, and honestly, I do not want to. But I have to file a report because she called it in. My advice, try to work this out before it escalates. These HOA things can get ugly fast." "It is already ugly," I said. "She has been fining me for doing basic home maintenance." "I get it," he said, sounding sympathetic. "My sister lives in an HOA community in Denver. They fined her for having a wreath on her door in July. Said it was not seasonal appropriate. These organizations can be nuts." After he left, I half expected Patricia to show up at my door, but she did not. Instead, I watched from my window as the HOA hired a landscaping crew to clear the snow from the clubhouse doors. It took them about an hour and probably cost the HOA several $100s. I considered it money well spent on their part for the education. The weekend passed quietly. Sunday evening, I found another orange envelope, but this one was thicker. Inside were 3 separate fines: $1,000 for destruction of HOA property, another $1,000 for creating a safety hazard, and $500 for harassment of HOA personnel. There was also a letter informing me that I was now on probationary status, and that any further violations would result in a lien being placed on my property. $2,700 in fines. For snow. I took pictures of everything, and on Monday morning I called a lawyer. His name was David Park, and he specialized in HOA disputes. His office was in downtown Boulder, and he agreed to see me that afternoon during my lunch break. David was a man in his 40s, Korean American, with sharp eyes and an office cluttered with case files. He listened to my story while taking notes, occasionally asking questions. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. "This is actually more common than you would think," he said. "HOAs wield a lot of power and sometimes board members abuse it. The good news is that Colorado law does provide protections for homeowners. The bad news is that fighting an HOA is expensive and time-consuming." "What are my options?" I asked. "You can pay the fines and try to avoid future violations, which it sounds like is nearly impossible given how arbitrary these rules are. You can try to get on the board yourself and change things from the inside, but that is a long game. Or you can fight this legally. I would need to review your HOA bylaws and covenants in detail, but from what you are telling me, some of these fines might be unenforceable. The snow removal policies sound vague and contradictory, which works in your favor. How much would it cost to fight this?" I asked. "My retainer is $5,000. Realistically, you are looking at $10,000 to $20,000 in legal fees if this goes all the way. Maybe more if it gets really contentious. But if we win, we can often get the HOA to cover your legal costs." I left his office with a lot to think about. $5,000 just to start, with no guarantee of winning. But the alternative was paying nearly $3,000 in bogus fines and living under Patricia's thumb indefinitely. That evening, I decided to do some research. I pulled up the Pine Ridge Estates HOA website and started digging through public documents. Board meeting minutes, financial reports, election records. What I found was interesting. Patricia had been president for 6 years, as Robert had said. But what was more interesting was that board positions were only contested twice in that entire time. Every other election had exactly the same number of candidates as open positions, meaning they ran unopposed. And in both contested elections, the challengers had been disqualified for incomplete paperwork. I also found that the HOA's annual budget had grown by 40% over the past 3 years, with most of the increase going toward administrative costs and legal reserves. Meanwhile, actual maintenance and improvement projects had decreased. The clubhouse, which supposedly justified our high monthly dues, was only open limited hours and frequently closed for private events. The more I dug, the more it smelled like corruption. I was not a lawyer, but I knew sketchy when I saw it. Tuesday evening, I got a knock on my door. It was Robert, the older man from the HOA meeting. "Got a minute?" he asked. I invited him in and offered him coffee. He settled into my kitchen chair with a sigh. "I heard about what you did at the clubhouse," he said, and I tensed, but then he smiled. "That was brilliant. Patricia has been stomping around like a wounded bear all week. I have lived here for 12 years and I have never seen anyone stand up to her like that." "It probably was not my smartest move," I admitted. "Maybe not, but it felt good, right?" he chuckled. "Listen, I talked to some other residents. There are a lot of people unhappy with how Patricia runs things, but everyone is too scared to speak up because of retaliation. The fines, the harassment, the way she controls everything. But if someone were to actually challenge her, they would have support." "What kind of support?" I asked. "There are about 40 households that I know of who are fed up. If we could organize, we might be able to force a recall election. The bylaws allow it with a petition signed by 30% of homeowners. We have about 200 homes in this development, so we would need 60 signatures." "And you think you could get that?" I asked. "I think we could try, but we would need someone willing to step up and lead it. Someone who is not afraid of Patricia." He looked at me meaningfully. I thought about it. I had never considered myself an activist or a leader. I was an engineer. I liked problems with clear solutions, machines that worked according to predictable rules. But this HOA situation was a problem, and it needed a solution, and apparently I was the only one crazy enough to try. "Okay," I said. "Let me do it." Over the next 2 weeks, Robert and I worked quietly. We reached out to residents we knew were unhappy, having careful conversations over coffee and at doorsteps. We explained the recall process and what it would take to remove Patricia from the board. The response was overwhelming. People had stories about ridiculous fines, denied modification requests, and bullying tactics. One woman had been fined for having the wrong color flowers in her garden. Another man was threatened with legal action because his daughter's swing set was visible from the street and deemed not aesthetically appropriate. Within 10 days, we had 73 signatures, well over the required 60. I filed the petition with the HOA, following the exact procedures outlined in the bylaws. The recall election would have to be held within 30 days. Patricia's response was immediate and vicious. The next day, I received a notice that my house was being subjected to a comprehensive compliance inspection for numerous reported violations. 2 days later, an inspector showed up at my door unannounced at 7 in the morning. His name was Carl, and he worked for a company the HOA contracted for inspections. He was apologetic, but said he had to do his job. He spent 2 hours walking around my property with a clipboard, taking notes and photos. He measured my fence height, checked the color of my trim, examined my roof shingles, and even counted how many decorative items I had in my front yard. When he was done, he handed me a copy of his report. I had 17 violations. My fence was 1 inch too tall according to the specifications. My house numbers were the wrong font style. I had a small crack in my driveway that needed to be repaired. My mailbox post was deteriorating even though it looked fine to me. The list went on and on, each item more petty than the last. The total fines added up to $6,400. I called David Park immediately. He reviewed the inspection report and laughed, though not with humor. "This is retaliation, pure and simple," he said. "Some of these violations are completely fabricated, a font on house numbers, that is not even in most HOA bylaws. We can fight this, but it confirms what I suspected. This HOA is being run improperly." "Can we use this in the recall election?" I asked. "Absolutely. This kind of targeted harassment actually strengthens your case. Document everything. Keep copies of all correspondence. If she keeps this up, we might have grounds for a lawsuit beyond just the fines." The recall election was scheduled for March 15th, about 3 weeks away. Patricia spent that time campaigning hard, sending letters to all homeowners about the radical elements trying to destabilize the community. She claimed that removing her would lead to chaos, decreased property values, and the deterioration of neighborhood standards. She held a special meeting at the Clubhouse, where she brought in a real estate agent who gave a presentation about how strong HOA leadership maintained home values. But Robert and I were busy too. We created a simple website outlining the issues: the excessive fines, the lack of transparency in spending, the suppression of board elections, and the pattern of retaliation against residents who questioned the board. We printed flyers and hand-delivered them to every house in the development. We organized a counter meeting at a local coffee shop where residents could voice their concerns in a neutral setting. Over 50 people showed up, and the stories they shared were damning. One elderly couple had been fined repeatedly for their lawn being inadequately green during a drought year when the city had asked residents to conserve water. A single mother had been threatened with foreclosure over $800 in fines because she installed a screen door without prior approval. A veteran had been denied permission to fly an American flag larger than 3 feet by 5 feet, which was apparently the maximum size allowed under the bylaws. The more people talked, the angrier everyone became. This was not about maintaining property values. This was about control. 3 days before the election, I came home to find my front door ajar. My heart jumped into my throat as I pushed it open carefully. The inside of my house had been ransacked. Drawers were pulled open, cushions were torn apart, and papers were scattered everywhere. My laptop was gone, along with my tablet and some cash I kept in my bedroom. I called the police immediately. Officer Morrison responded again, along with another officer. They took statements and photos, dusted for fingerprints, and filed a report. It looked like a standard burglary, except something felt off. My television was still there, a 60-inch flat screen that would have been easy to take. My expensive power tools in the garage were untouched. Whoever did this was looking for something specific. Then I realized what was missing. The folder where I kept all my HOA documents, including the petition signatures and the evidence we had gathered about Patricia's mismanagement, was gone. I had backups, thank God, scanned and stored in the cloud, but someone had been looking for that information. I mentioned this to Officer Morrison, and his expression grew serious. "You think the HOA president was involved in this?" he asked. "I do not have proof," I said, "but the timing is suspicious, and the only thing of real value that was taken were those documents." "That is a serious accusation," he said. "Breaking and entering is a felony. If someone associated with the HOA did this, they could be looking at real prison time." "Can you investigate it?" I asked. "We will do what we can. Check with your neighbors, see if anyone saw anything. If you have any evidence connecting this to the HOA, let us know immediately." After the police left, I called David Park and explained what happened. He was quiet for a long moment. "This has crossed a line," he said finally. "If Patricia or anyone acting on her behalf broke into your home, that is criminal activity. We need to be very careful here. I am going to advise you to install security cameras immediately, and do not stay alone if you can avoid it. If they are desperate enough to break into your house, I do not know what else they might do." That night, Robert stayed over in my guest room, and the next morning I installed a complete security system with cameras covering all my doors and windows. I also changed all my locks. The day before the election, Patricia sent out a mass email to all residents. In it, she claimed that I was a troublemaker who had threatened HOA board members and vandalized community property. She said the recall election was based on false accusations, and that voting to remove her would be a vote for anarchy and disorder. She even suggested that I might be involved in the recent burglary at my own home as a way to generate sympathy. I was furious, but David advised me not to respond directly. "Let her dig her own grave," he said. "The more extreme she gets, the more obvious it becomes that she is desperate." The election was held on a Saturday at the Clubhouse. Voting was open from 9 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon, with all homeowners eligible to cast ballots. Robert and I stationed ourselves outside the entrance, not campaigning since that was against the rules within a certain distance, but just being visible and available to answer questions. The turnout was incredible. Usually, HOA elections saw maybe 20% participation, but by noon over half the community had shown up to vote. I watched as neighbors I had never spoken to walked in, some nodding at me encouragingly, others avoiding eye contact. Patricia stood on the opposite side of the entrance with her 2 board allies, Gregory and Susan. all of them wearing matching Pine Ridge Estates polo shirts like they were part of some official organization. At 3 o'clock, the polls closed and the counting began. Per the bylaws, the count had to be witnessed by at least 5 homeowners who were not board members. Robert and I volunteered, along with 3 others. We sat in the conference room while the HOA's secretary, Susan, opened each ballot and called out the vote. The results were not even close. 173 votes for recall, 42 votes against. Patricia Henderson was officially removed as HOA president, effective immediately. Patricia's face went through a range of colors as the final tally was announced. Red, then white, then red again. She stood up so abruptly her chair fell backward. "This is illegitimate," she said, her voice shaking. "The process was flawed. I am filing a formal challenge." "The process followed the bylaws exactly," David Park said. He had come to observe the count. "The vote is valid." "You are no longer president, Mrs. Henderson." "I will sue," she said. "I will sue the HOA. I will sue you," she pointed at me. "I will sue everyone involved in this farce." "You are welcome to try," David said calmly. "But I would note that, as of right now, you no longer have the authority to spend HOA funds on legal fees. Any lawsuit you file would be at your own expense." That seemed to hit her. Patricia grabbed her purse and stormed out of the clubhouse, with Gregory and Susan following behind her like confused ducklings. The room erupted in applause once she was gone. People were hugging, shaking hands, celebrating like we had just won something huge. And maybe we had. Per the bylaws, a special election for a new board would need to be held within 60 days. In the meantime, the existing board members would remain in their positions, but without Patricia, Gregory and Susan had no real authority or drive to continue her policies. That evening, Robert and about a dozen other residents came over to my house. We ordered pizza and celebrated, drinking beer and sharing stories about the worst fines and most ridiculous rules we had endured. It felt good to finally have community, real community, not the fake kind the HOA pretended to create, but the celebration was short-lived. Monday morning, I got a call from Officer Morrison. "Mr. Coleman, can you come down to the station? We have some developments in your burglary case." I drove to the Boulder Police Department, my stomach tight with anxiety. Officer Morrison met me in the lobby and led me to a small conference room. "We recovered your laptop," he said. "It was found in a dumpster behind a strip mall about 2 miles from your house. Whoever took it tried to wipe it but did not do a very thorough job. Our tech guys were able to recover some data, including browser history and file access logs." "Okay," I said, not sure where this was going. "The browser history shows that someone accessed your email and cloud storage accounts. They also looked at the HOA petition documents and the financial records you had compiled. But here is the interesting part. After accessing your stuff, they logged into an email account belonging to Patricia Henderson and forwarded several of your documents to themselves." My eyes widened. So Patricia was behind the break-in. Not necessarily her directly, but someone using her email. We showed this evidence to a judge and got a warrant to search her home and electronics. We executed that warrant this morning. "And?" I asked, leaning forward. "And we found some very interesting things." Patricia Henderson had files on her personal computer documenting HOA finances that do not match the official records. It appears she has been embezzling money from the HOA for at least 3 years, maybe longer. We are talking about over $200,000 that should have gone to community maintenance and improvements, but instead went into personal accounts. I sat back, stunned. $200,000. That is a conservative estimate. We have turned the case over to the DA's office. They are bringing in forensic accountants to go through everything. But there is more. We also found evidence that Patricia hired someone to break into your house. Text messages on her phone discussing payment for taking care of the Coleman problem and retrieving sensitive documents. The person she hired is a guy named Dennis Hopper, no relation to the actor. He's got a record for burglary and petty theft. We picked him up this morning, and he is already cooperating in exchange for a reduced sentence. So she is going to be arrested? I asked. She already has been. Charges include embezzlement, conspiracy to commit burglary, and unlawful computer access. Her bail hearing is this afternoon. Given the amount of money involved and the fact that she is clearly a flight risk, the DA is asking for high bail. I left the police station feeling like I was in a dream. This had started as a stupid argument about snow and had somehow uncovered years of criminal activity. I called David Park and filled him in. "This is huge," he said. "Not just for your case, but for everyone in that HOA. If Patricia was embezzling, the HOA can sue her to recover those funds. And any fines or liens she imposed during her tenure are now questionable. We could potentially get everyone's money back." Over the next few days, the story exploded. The local Boulder News picked it up, running segments about HOA president arrested for embezzlement. Reporters called me for interviews, but David advised me to keep a low profile while the investigation continued. The HOA community was in shock. People were angry, confused, and wanted answers. An emergency HOA meeting was called for the following week. Over 100 residents packed into the clubhouse, filling every seat and lining the walls. Gregory, the treasurer, stood at the front looking like he wanted to disappear into the floor. "I want to start by saying I had no knowledge of Patricia's actions," he said, his voice shaky. "I trusted her to handle the finances properly. I should have been more diligent. I should have asked more questions. I am sorry." "How much money did she take?" someone shouted from the back. "The forensic accountants are still going through everything, but preliminary estimates put it at around $230,000 over 4 years, Gregory said. The room erupted in anger. People were shouting, demanding to know how this could have happened, why no one noticed, what would happen now. Robert stood up and the room gradually quieted. "The question is not just what happened, but what we do now. We need a completely new board, one that is transparent and accountable. We need to change our bylaws to include better financial oversight, and we need to support the legal process to get our money back." "I nominate Robert for president," someone called out, and others immediately seconded it. Robert looked surprised but nodded. "I will serve if you want me to. But we need to do this right. We need to hold proper elections, let anyone who wants to run put their name forward, and vote fairly." The elections were held 3 weeks later. Robert won the presidency in a landslide. I ended up on the board too, as vice president, something I had never intended but felt obligated to do given everything that had happened. 2 other residents who had been vocal about reform also joined the board. Gregory and Susan both resigned, acknowledging that they had failed in their oversight duties. One of our first actions as the new board was to hire an independent auditor to review all HOA finances from the past 10 years. The full scope of Patricia's theft became clear. She had been skimming money from the annual budget, inflating contractor costs and pocketing the difference, and creating fake vendors that she paid from HOA funds. The total came to $267,000. The HOA filed a civil lawsuit against Patricia to recover the money. Her assets were frozen pending the outcome of the criminal trial. Meanwhile, the district attorney was building a case that could send her to prison for up to 15 years. We also reviewed every fine issued during Patricia's tenure as president. We found hundreds of questionable fines, many of which were clearly retaliatory or based on made-up violations. The board voted to refund all fines issued in the past 3 years, totaling over $80,000. My own fines, which had ballooned to nearly $10,000 with late fees, were completely voided. The process of cleaning up the mess took months. We rewrote the bylaws to include term limits for board members, mandatory financial audits, and clear procedures for contesting fines. We established a grievance committee made up of residents who were not on the board to review disputes independently. We made all financial records publicly available online. We turned the HOA from a dictatorship into something that actually resembled a community organization. Patricia's trial began in September. I attended several days of testimony. The prosecution laid out a clear case of embezzlement and fraud. Patricia's defense tried to argue that she had simply been bad at bookkeeping, that it was incompetence, not malice, but the evidence of deliberate deception was overwhelming. The jury convicted her on all counts after just 4 hours of deliberation. She was sentenced to 8 years in prison and ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA. Her house was sold to help cover the debt, along with her car and most of her personal assets. It would not be enough to recover everything, but it was something. Dennis Hopper, the man she had hired to break into my house, got 3 years for burglary and testified against Patricia. His testimony about their text messages and payment arrangements had been crucial in proving the conspiracy charges. As for me, my life gradually returned to normal, though I stayed active in the HOA. I learned that community involvement actually mattered, that when people checked out and let others run things unchallenged, bad things could happen. The snow that had started this whole mess became sort of a running joke in the neighborhood. That winter, when the first big snowstorm hit, several neighbors deliberately shoveled their snow into piles near my house as a gesture of solidarity and humor. We all laughed about it. The clubhouse got used more. We started having actual community events, like summer barbecues and holiday parties, things that brought people together instead of driving them apart with fines and rules. Property values did not collapse without Patricia's iron fist, despite her predictions. If anything, they went up because people actually wanted to live in a neighborhood where they were not constantly afraid of arbitrary fines. I kept in touch with David Park, who told me that HOA abuse cases were more common than most people realized. He had a whole practice built around defending homeowners from overreaching associations. He said my case had become something of a legend in his circles, the guy who fought back against an HOA over snow and accidentally uncovered a massive fraud. Robert turned out to be a great HOA president. He was fair, transparent, and actually cared about making the community better rather than just wielding power. We became good friends, often grabbing beers and talking about the absurdity of what we had been through. One evening, about a year after everything had settled, I was sitting on my porch watching the sunset when a young couple walked by with a stroller. They stopped and introduced themselves as new residents, just moved in last week. "We heard you were the guy who took down the crazy HOA president," the husband said, grinning. "That is legendary," I laughed. "I just wanted to shovel my driveway without getting fined." "Well, we appreciate it," the wife said. "We almost did not buy here because we heard horror stories about HOAs, but then we read about what happened and how you all reformed things. It actually convinced us this was a good place to live." After they walked away, I sat there thinking about the bizarre chain of events that had started with a simple snowstorm. If Patricia had just been reasonable, If she had not let power go to her head, none of this would have happened. She would still be HOA president, still embezzling money, and everyone would still be miserable under her rule. Instead, a little civil disobedience with a snow shovel had brought down a corrupt regime and given a community back to its residents. It was not how I expected my life to go, but I could not say I regretted it. The next winter, we got another big snowstorm. I went out to shovel my driveway, and this time I put the snow wherever made the most sense without worrying about arbitrary rules. Some went on my lawn, some went back toward the curb, and you know what? Nobody cared. Because that is how it should be, common sense instead of petty tyranny. I never did pile snow against the clubhouse doors again, though. Once was enough. It had made its point. Sometimes I wondered what Patricia thought about in prison, whether she regretted her actions or still believed she had been in the right. Probably the latter, knowing her personality. People like that rarely admitted fault, but it did not matter anymore. She had lost and the community had won. The experience taught me something valuable about standing up for yourself, even when it seemed easier to just comply and pay the fines. Injustice, ignored, only grows. Someone has to be willing to push back, to say this is wrong and I am not going to accept it, even if it costs them something in the short term. I had gotten lucky that pushing back had exposed something bigger than just unfair fines, but even if it had not, I would not have regretted fighting. That spring, we used some of the recovered embezzlement money to make real improvements to the community. We upgraded the playground equipment at the park, resurfaced the tennis courts, and renovated the clubhouse gym. We did the things Patricia had always claimed we could not afford while she was siphoning off funds for herself. Watching kids play on the new swings and seeing neighbors actually use the facilities felt good, like we had accomplished something meaningful. The local news did a follow-up story about a year after Patricia's conviction, calling Pine Ridge Estates an example of community reform and resident empowerment. They interviewed me, Robert, and several other residents. It was a nice piece, focusing on how ordinary people could make change when they organized and stood up for themselves. The reporter asked me what advice I would give to other homeowners dealing with difficult HOAs. Document everything, I said. Keep records of all fines, all correspondence, all violations they claim you committed. Get involved. Go to meetings even when it seems pointless, because you need to know what is happening. Talk to your neighbors, find allies. And do not be afraid to fight back when something is genuinely wrong, even if it seems easier to just comply. Sometimes the only way to fix a broken system is to challenge it head-on. The segment aired on a Tuesday evening. By Wednesday morning, I had received a dozen emails from people in other HOA communities across Colorado asking for advice on dealing with their own situations. I tried to help where I could, pointing them toward lawyers like David Park, who specialized in HOA disputes, explaining the process we had used for the recall election, and encouraging them to organize their neighbors. It was strange to think that my frustration with snow removal fines had turned into something like activism, but that was where life had taken me. I was not complaining. I had found a sense of purpose I had not known I was missing. 2 years after the whole saga began, I was still living in Pine Ridge Estates, still serving on the HOA board, and still shoveling snow in the winter without fear of fines. The community had stabilized into something functional and even pleasant. We had our disagreements and debates about policies, but they were handled reasonably, with discussion and compromise rather than threats and punishment. One February morning, I woke up to another big snowstorm. 14 inches, just like the one that had started everything. I smiled as I pulled on my winter gear and grabbed my shovel. This time, I knew exactly where the snow would go, and I knew nobody would find me for it. As I cleared my driveway, several neighbors came out to do the same. We waved to each other, called out greetings, and one guy even came over to help me finish my sidewalk. This was what a community was supposed to feel like. Not rules and fines and fear, but people helping each other and living their lives without constant scrutiny. I thought about Patricia sometimes, locked away in a prison cell. I did not take pleasure in her punishment, but I did not feel bad about it either. She had made her choices, and those choices had consequences. She had hurt a lot of people with her greed and her need for control. The fact that she faced justice for it was appropriate. The snow kept falling, covering everything in fresh white. I finished my driveway, waved to my neighbors, and went inside to make coffee. Through my window, I could see the peaceful scene of our neighborhood, everyone going about their business, taking care of their homes without fear or harassment. It had been a long journey from that first ridiculous fine to where we stood now. There had been stress, anger, and even real danger when Patricia had escalated to criminal activity. But we had come through it, not just surviving but actually improving things. The HOA was better, the community was stronger, and people felt like they had a voice again. That evening, Robert stopped by with a bottle of bourbon. 2-year anniversary, he said, grinning. 2 years since you piled snow against the clubhouse doors and started this whole thing. I laughed and poured us both drinks. I cannot believe it has been 2 years. Best thing that ever happened to this place, Robert said, raising his glass. To standing up to tyrants, even when the tyrant is your HOA president. To common sense prevailing, I added, and we clinked glasses. We sat in my living room, drinking bourbon and watching the snow continue to fall outside. Life was good. The HOA drama was behind us, replaced by a functional system that actually served the community instead of exploiting it. I had never wanted to be a crusader or a community leader, but sometimes life pushes you into roles you do not expect. And sometimes, all it takes is refusing to accept an unjust fine for shoveling snow to change everything. The snow kept falling that night, blanketing the neighborhood in quiet white. In the morning, we would all go out with our shovels and clear our driveways, putting the snow wherever made sense, and nobody would fine us for it. That simple freedom, the ability to maintain your property without fear of arbitrary punishment, was something I would never take for granted again. Patricia Henderson had tried to build a little empire of control and fear in Pine Ridge Estates. Instead, she had accidentally created a community of people who learned to stand together and fight back. Her legacy was not the order and property values she claimed to care about, but rather a neighborhood of residents who understood the value of oversight, transparency, and holding leaders accountable. As for me, I went back to being an engineer, going to work every day and dealing with machines and specifications. But I also stayed involved in the HOA, attending meetings, serving on committees, and making sure we never slid back into the kind of dysfunction that had existed before. It was not glamorous work, but it mattered. Sometimes the biggest battles are fought over the smallest things. A pile of snow, a $500 fine, a choice to push back instead of comply. Those small moments can cascade into something much larger, exposing rot and creating opportunities for real change. I had learned that lesson the hard way, standing in my driveway with a shovel, angry about an unjust fine, and deciding that enough was enough. The neighborhood was quiet now, peaceful under its blanket of snow. Inside homes all around me, families were settling in for the evening, secure in the knowledge that their HOA served them rather than ruled them. It was a small victory in the grand scheme of things, one neighborhood in one city reforming one corrupt organization. But it was our victory, hard-won and meaningful. I finished my bourbon and looked out at the winter landscape. Tomorrow would bring more snow to shovel, more driveways to clear, more ordinary maintenance tasks that were no longer fraught with anxiety about fines and violations. Just normal life in a normal neighborhood, which was exactly what it should have been all along. Patricia Henderson had taught me something valuable, though not what she intended. She taught me that authority without accountability becomes tyranny, that small injustices unchallenged grow into larger ones, and that ordinary people have more power than they realize when they choose to use it. Those were good lessons, worth the stress and struggle it took to learn them. The snow finally stopped falling around midnight. I went to bed knowing that in the morning, the whole neighborhood would be out with shovels, clearing paths and helping neighbors, living in the community we had fought to reclaim. And if any snow happened to end up on the street or piled on lawns, well, that was just fine. Because rules should serve people, not the other way around. That was the real victory. Not the convictions or the recovered money or even the reformed bylaws, but the simple fact that we had remembered how to be a community instead of subjects. And it had all started with snow, a shovel, and the refusal to accept an unjust fine. Sometimes the best rebellions start small,